Okay, welcome back to the Smarter Building podcast and our special episode live at the BIM Summit by Symetri. I'm joined here by Jack Cooke from Kaseya. It's great to have you. How have you found the day so far?
Yeah, it's been a great day so far, to be fair. Some really interesting sessions. Listened to Andy's session from Cortita before, which was really insightful on some cybersecurity stuff. And yeah, like some of the conversations and some of the attendees have been absolutely phenomenal. So,
and you were actually here because you are part of the cybersecurity panel, right? So could you just tell us a bit about how that went?
Yeah, it was really good. Myself, Andy actually was on the panel as well, and then Diego. A lot of conversation around really sort of, I guess, a bit of a focus on cyber threats and sort of what that looks like for businesses, particularly businesses in this space, because I think something we hear a little bit about on the news or see a little bit, but no one's really always understanding what the sort of real size and scale of these sort of threats are. So I think trying to just help people understand and recognize that a little bit.
I think some examples Andy gave were some quite scary things where I think he just caught like a snapshot of someone's video online and then he used like a voiceover to pretend to be someone, right? So there's so many things going on that we don't know can actually impact us. So have you heard a lot about that from the architecture or construction industry in particular?
Yeah, so there was actually something very similar in that space happened very recently, more in the engineering side of things, but huge company last year, like massive multinational engineering company, they lost $25 million. Wow. Because they had someone able to impersonate their CFO as a deepfake on a call. I think by the end of it, they were on a call with 10 other people, and that CFO was able to convince a member of the staff to transfer $25 million in a payment to a bank account in Hong Kong, which then just immediately disappeared. And I think that process, there was like a phishing email, there were like fake text messages exchanged, all sorts of stuff, in trying to convince this person to complete that transaction. So that one was very relevant from what Andy was talking about.
So how do people kind of avoid this happening in the future? Because in our industry, for example, there's so much data that people are using for their construction projects. So if any of that sort of is tapped into, that's like really negative for us. So how can businesses sort of try to prevent that in the future?
So there's sort of two questions there in the sense. There's one, like, how do we prevent the sort of larger scale cyber attacks, or that, like those likes of phishing and AI simulated attacks, which are really hard to catch, and you need a lot of process and procedure in place to try and limit those as much as possible. And then you've got that sort of second half, which is that data security side of things. How do we really protect that data? And I think there's a lot of stuff that you can do with data protected. You've got likes of AV, EDR, cloud protected platforms now. But a lot of the time when we front load that security, as we've seen time and time again, it's not really a question of if, it's a question of sort of when a lot of these breaches or attacks are going to happen. Because most businesses now, they've got to protect a million different ways into their data. It just takes one slip up from one person, and all of a sudden they're into some sort of disaster scenario. So really focusing on what that disaster recovery side of things looks like is, for me personally, I think really important. I think you can front load with as much security as you want, and I think you really should do that as well. But having a disaster recovery and a business continuity plan in place is so critical, because it just takes that one slip up.
So from what was discussed on that panel, what are some sort of common misconceptions that people have, and what are they perhaps getting right versus what they're getting wrong when it comes to that cybersecurity readiness?
I think there's a lot of people are doing a little bit of both. Like, I don't think you can necessarily say everyone's getting stuff right or everyone's getting stuff wrong. I think, and Andy from Cortita made a fantastic point of, it's very much what's relevant to your business and what makes sense for your business. Not every business needs to go and invest in millions and millions of dollars worth of stuff, but having a base level is really important for most businesses. And again, coming above that base level, it's kind of, where do you want to be seen in the spectrum? Because I think we're also going to start seeing probably a lot more regulations come down from governing bodies and governments around what businesses need to have in place. And I think those businesses that can get in front of that early doors are going to be in a much better place when it comes to potentially winning clients or renewing clients, because if their sort of clients are looking and saying, well, you look a little bit patchy on some of this stuff, or you don't look like you're maybe as secure, and I'm trusting you with my data and your massive big projects. What if something that gets out? What's the trouble look like versus this other organization's able to put all these certifications and all these steps that they're doing to protect their data in front of me here? That makes me feel a little bit more reassured.
So what are some of the regulations that could come into force or are already in force?
Yeah, so one of the big ones obviously is NIST 2. It's something that we were sort of supposed to see be enforced last year by sort of the European government. It's kind of been pushed off a little bit. I wouldn't say indefinitely at the minute, but there's not really a hard timeline of when that's likely to come into play.
Yeah.
And that's one of the first times we're really sort of seeing, particularly from a cybersecurity standpoint, enforced sort of regulations on businesses. And businesses of a certain size that want to work within Europe in any way, shape or form are going to have to really play within those guidelines.
So what about the, I know in our industry in particular, a lot of construction projects have to be cyber, or the companies doing some projects have to be Cyber Essentials certified. So are there any regulations that come with that?
There are. I would always be a little bit hesitant with Cyber Essentials style stuff. Like, I think it's a great certification to get.
Yeah.
But some of the issues with some of those certifications are that they're very much a point in time certification, and that you've ticked all the boxes to say, hey, look, yeah, I'm compliant with Cyber Essentials. I've got my Cyber Essentials award.
Yeah.
But you could get that on the Monday and be out of compliance by the following Monday.
Ah, I see. Right.
It's that sort of idea. You could put locks in all your windows and lock all your windows for your home insurance. But then if you go on holiday and leave one window unlocked and the house burns down, because you've left that window unlocked, your home insurance company are going to say, well, hey, you told us you had locks in your window, but you actually didn't have them all locked. And it's the same thing with sort of Cyber Essentials. You've really got to make sure that you're constantly staying on top of it. With a lot of those sort of certifications, it's very much a point in time.
Right.
At that point in time you're on top of it might not always stay that way. So
how do you keep on top of that? What's a better sort of a strategy, would you say?
I would say, some of the sort of other certifications have a little bit more of a consistent standard, but like a consistent compliance focus is really important nowadays. We're seeing things like compliance as a service start to come into play, where organizations are consistently monitoring either their compliance regulations or those of their clients. And I think being able to do that, and rather than just being one point in time in a year or biannual sort of circuit when you do the certifications, being able to say consistently, I am in compliance with that standard, is going to become really, really important. I think that's some of the stuff we'll see coming through from this too as well.
So lots of sort of compliance. So is there much that the government is kind of pushing, or is it kind of a bit of a grey area at the moment? We always see things in our industry, we're kind of demanding the government to do more. Is there more that we should be doing in this area as well in particular?
Yeah, I think that there's always more that we can be doing.
Yeah.
I think if people aren't engaging with cybersecurity frameworks, that's sort of like a base level way, look at a cybersecurity framework. There's tons of them out there. I'm not necessarily saying that one's particular, the best framework to go look at, but understanding what they look like and what one might look like for your business is a really great way to start working through that. And then an exercise that I love doing with businesses of all shapes and sizes is what I class as like a cybersecurity tabletop exercise. Okay. So actually sit down and say, right, if we were to be hit with, say, a ransomware attack, okay, and let's ignore that we've got all this super security that should protect us, but if that that one slip up happens and we have a ransomware attack, how do we react? Yeah. Does every member of staff know how to react to that? There was a study done in Ireland back, the Irish equivalent of the NHS, the HSE, was hit with a ransomware attack in COVID. They did a study of like 5,000 employees, and like talking to your employer about like a ransomware pop-up on your screen was something like 6th or 7th on the list of like the actions people would do before they like went to their employer. Trying to understand is everyone in the business up to speed on this, and then not just is everyone up to speed, but what's your PR approach? If this is something that happens at a really bad time for your organization, and these cyber criminal organizations are intelligent. They're not looking at a one-off attack that's just going to be in the best possible time for your organization. They'll sit there and they'll wait till it's the worst possible time. So maybe you've just won a big contract and you're about to start a huge project, or there's a huge construction that's just about to start, and you obviously need all hands on deck, and all of a sudden you're locked out of all your systems. What does that look like for you as a business? Have you got a plan in place to come back from that? But also, have you got a plan in place to maybe, outwardly communicate that? Which members of the team need to be active? Who needs to be aware of it? What processes do you need to follow? Because a lot of times businesses kind of think about it in a best case scenario. They don't necessarily think about it in the worst case scenario.
I think that's kind of been the key theme of this event here. It's just trying to get that understanding of everything relies on that data. So if you're not protecting that, it could have such a big knock-on effect on all of the projects that you've got coming up. So going back a bit to you and your background, we often hear more about like disaster recovery plans in the world of IT. But what does that actually mean specifically? Could you just give us like a brief explanation, and how could that be translated into the sort of construction industry?
So I think, again, it can play really nicely off the back of one of those tabletop exercises, or however you want to put it together. But a business continuity plan, you've really got to understand what's critical to your organization and their day-to-day running. So what systems you need access to, like all the time. There's going to be some systems that are really core to your business function, and then there's going to be some that are maybe a little bit more in the periphery. Understanding, right, as an organization, if we were to have an incident or cyber attack, or something locks us out of our systems, which systems do we need to get access to immediately to try to limit our downtime for our staff and our employees, like our staff and our clients? Which systems do we need to get back up and running as quickly as possible? And also, where and how do we need to get them back up and running? If they're entirely on-prem or in the cloud, have we got a way to access that data if we're being locked out of our network? Have we got a copy, a backup, or something that we can spin up and continue to access and work off? And if so, what order is important to bring it up in, and which bits are, some bits you might need access to straight away, some bits you might go, okay, that's, we can go 12 hours before we need access to that. But just having a plan and a structure and a procedure for it is really important.
I think you touched on before as well, like there was a study that companies, if they see something pop up, they're kind of not really doing too much on it. So how have you seen any good examples of any companies where they have got that sort of cybersecurity culture ingrained, and how do people get to that?
I think it's got to be really ingrained from day one with a lot of your staff, or it's quite a big shift to change a company's culture on that. And again, something we talked about in the panel was this sort of zero blame style approach of the reason I think a lot of those people didn't report it till they were like, a seventh thing in their queue, they were trying to delete it or trying to close it down and restart the computer and all this stuff first, was because they're concerned about how their employer is going to react to that, or are they going to get in trouble?
It's true.
And I think it's encouraging people like, look, we would much rather you bring it to us because then we can react to it and we can protect the company. And for me, I think it's bringing a lot of people on the journey with you. Everyone's busy. Everyone's being asked to do more with less these days, and everyone's weeks are really packed. So when you're saying to someone, hey, I need you to find 30 minutes this week to go do this cybersecurity training, they're like, well, I've got all these other projects on, where am I supposed to find the time to do that? Helping them understand and realize, well, look, I need you to do that cybersecurity training because if one person in this organization slips up and we have a breach, and then that knocks the organization out of action for a couple of days, that potentially puts everyone's jobs at risk. And so actually it's super important that not just the key individuals within the organization, but every member of staff within that organization is on the same page.
Do you think people also don't know like the current landscape of what a threat could look like? So as I said, deepfakes, that's obviously quite like a new thing. Was there any other sort of examples that are coming across now that are kind of new threats?
So I think we'll hit one of the buzzwords with AI. AI is a massive thing. Okay, and we're seeing more and more of it in cyber threats as well as cybersecurity. One area where we're seeing it a lot in cyber threats is what we class as AI-enabled cyber threats, where the AI is helping with an aspect of the cyber attack. A place where it's been doing that a lot at the minute is phishing, because what used to take a long time to generate like a really convincing phishing email, not that one that says it's from your long lost uncle who has a £2 million inheritance for you, one that's really convincing to try and make you actually click the links, used to take a long time to try formulate and put together. now with the likes of AI, you can generate those in seconds.
Yeah,
And then you can also generate incredibly convincing landing pages that look exactly like Microsoft or look exactly like Google or any of the other cloud sort of softwares that you use, where you might have to enter a password, because that's what they need you to do. They need you to click on the link and then get through to a separate landing page where they can harvest your credentials. So that's probably an area where we're seeing a big increase at the minute.
What sort of like one key thing you could offer to companies that to look out for though with those sorts of things? As you said, like clicking on the links, but what is one key thing people should look for to entice them not to click?
I think when it comes to a phishing email, one of the hardest things is the actual email address itself.
Yeah.
So not just if it says my name's Jack Cooke at the top, click into it and actually check out that it says Jack Cooke from the correct company, and everything checks out. Because what we're also now saying, that's the one bit they can't really sort of spoof all the time. This is the bit that's probably most likely to reflect it's a phishing email. But we're seeing a lot of build up of very similar domains. So that if your company has an L in its name somewhere, there might be someone registering the very similar domain but changing that L to an I or changing that L to a 1. So at a very quick glance, someone's going to say, "Oh, that looks exactly like it should look."
Yeah.
They might not pick up on that, but I think that sort of really checking the domain and the name from not just what's in bold at the top, but clicking into it and seeing the actual email address that it's come from is probably one of the easiest ways to spot it.
Okay. I think you've kind of touched on this a little bit as well, but many sort of construction and property firms are seeing cybersecurity as, again, just this issue that IT deals with. Now, we've spoken about making this like an ingrained culture, but how can we kind of shift that mindset into wider business continuity plans and embed sort of cyber resilience for people?
Yeah, again, I think an aspect of it is it's not going to happen overnight. Right? It's going to be very, very difficult to get everyone on board very quickly with it. It's helping them realize what the long-term impact of something like that might be on the business, so that they can all kind of get on board with it. I think business continuity plans are one that constantly get overlooked as well, because a lot of businesses will do it as part of maybe their cyber essentials or something like that. They'll create one, but then it sits in a drawer and doesn't get used doesn't even get looked at for maybe a year or 6 months, or until they're about ready to go do their next certification.
Yeah.
You think about how many staff you might have come and go in a year period, or how many systems within a business might change. That plan might have been very accurate at the point it was drawn up, but within a month or two, or 6 months in particular, it could be slightly obsolete. So not just building a business continuity plan, but as with everything we've touched on here, and this is why it's difficult, because it's time. It's not necessarily it requires an effort, but it's more the time. It's more continually touching on it. It's not a once a year type thing. At a minimum, it's sort of a once a quarter type thing of continually revisiting your security training, your staff's awareness. Is everyone on board? Does everyone understand what they're doing? Does everyone know where the business continuity plan is? One of the funniest things we see with particularly the likes of business continuity plans is businesses spend all these times putting one together, and then they'll either save it on their SharePoint, and then they'll not think about it and they'll be like, cool, what if that incident that means you need it
then
locks you out of your SharePoint and you can't access it? Or if you have printed it off, where is it kept within the office? Does everyone have a copy? Or do all the key people have a copy and know exactly where it is? Because if it's not, again, being constantly touched on, these things, people tend to forget these things.
And I think Andy also mentioned in part of his presentation that a common misconception in our industry specifically is, it just won't ever happen to me. Our data isn't as important enough. But I guess it's just, as you said, getting that mindset of what would actually happen, what would the business effect be if we didn't have this in place.
I think the data aspect of it, everyone's got data, right? And data is money to a lot of these businesses. But also, it's not necessarily just what you have as a business, it's what you are as a business. If you are running, then you don't want to have to stop. You don't want to have to stop your business dead in the water for a few days. So it might not just be what sensitive data have you got that they can, threaten to release or hold against you, but also is it, well, if we can stop you from operating as a business at some really key times for you, then you're going to probably be willing to maybe look to pay us. And it's also not just, again, the payments, but it's the what happens if you have to stop as a business, and then you've got to declare that to your clients.
That's probably the key thing.
Yeah, you've got to let your clients know, hey, sorry, we were a victim of a ransomware attack or a cyber attack.
And it makes them lose trust with you as well, right?
Exactly. There's all sorts of mad statistics out there. There's one from the FBI that suggests something as high as something like 67% of businesses that are hit by a successful cyber attack never recover and go out of business. That's 2/3.
Wow.
It's a lot of organizations that, from one slip up, that's a lot of people that could potentially lose their job.
I think that's what people, that they weigh up, it costs so much money, but then when you put it like that, if your business will never kind of continue after that, then it's worth it. But I think it's, how do you get people to encourage that investment? I guess that's something you probably come up a challenge quite a lot.
Yeah, look, again, it depends on the different businesses, and different organizations have different structures, and I think if you want to help them realize what the whole picture is, okay? Because it is, you've got the cost of the downtime, so you've got to be, you can't stop paying your staff. If you're out of action for 2 days, you've still got to pay all your staff. You might have projects that stall for 2 days, and you've got to pay not just your staff, but huge amounts of laborers or engineers, specialist people, machinery. You've then got your overheads. You've then got potentially fines that you might have to pay, like the GDPR, stuff like that, for having a data breach. You've then got the potential loss of your reputation and the clients. And then you've got the actual cost of your downtime itself of, well, you've lost maybe 5-6 hours worth of data because you only have a backup every 5-6 hours, and it's taking you 3 days to get back up and running. It all stacks up. And I think people tend to have this habit of saying, looking at it through very rose-tinted goggles for their own business and saying, hey, worst case scenario, we'd be fine in a day or two. But then when you start sort of adding all those little bits of it together, it stacks up pretty quickly. And just, okay, well, actually, maybe not a day or two, maybe an hour or two max. And it's even working out what's an hour or two cost the business. Like, if you're a business that's turning over, millions a year, an hour or two could be, thousands of pounds that you need to be bringing into the business. And actually being down for an hour or two is still going to be hugely detrimental.
Well, hopefully our listeners will kind of get that message now.
Yeah, and I think this is it. And again, you probably see the theme of this across the day. A lot of this stuff it comes across as really scary, all right? And it's there's this massive scale of this, and we talked a little bit before the podcast about actually the scale of cyber criminal organizations, and a lot of people don't realize just how big they are. And it's not that one person sat in their mum or dad's basement. Yeah. But I think a theme or a phrase a friend of mine used recently is, the idea here isn't to terrify, it's to demystify. We don't want, it's a lot of people just don't fully understand what the threats are actually out there. And we want to help people understand so they can then take action against it. You don't know what you don't know, and you can only fight or counteract against what you understand to be out there. And for a lot of people, this is kind of like, oh, what's that one person in mum or dad's basement? They're not going to attack my business. Well, actually, it's not. It's huge multinational organizations with a core goal of trying to shut down your business for a few days, because that's how they get paid. That's how they make their money. And so they need to be doing that.
And I think we've been talking about how it can specifically impact the construction industry, but as we're seeing, it's just businesses everywhere, to be honest, isn't it? There might be particular things that would affect a construction business, but it sounds like it's actually the same issue across most businesses, to be honest.
It is, yeah. Look, it's businesses of all shapes and sizes, and it's businesses everywhere. I think what's also really important for businesses to look at whenever they're thinking about securing their own organization is what's really critical within your supply chain. Because if you you're completely locked on your organization, you have I would say nothing's ever 100% impenetrable, but if it's you think I'm 100% impenetrable here, we're safe, we're secure. What if you rely on a little bit of software, a bit of tech from another business, and they're not 100% secure, and that business goes down, all of a sudden, that puts your business into that 100% massively decreases. So it's looking at your own business, but also looking up and down your supply chain and understanding, okay, well, what could impact me really adversely if they were to be hit, and then having open and frank conversations with them about what they're doing to protect themselves and their cybersecurity posture.
So for a company that knows they kind of need to up their game, what's the first practical step you think they could take to help improve their cybersecurity posture?
Yeah, so a hard look in the mirror is probably a good one. As a Northern Irish person, well, trying to say mirror is not always an easy word to say. I would pronounce it as mirror. But having a look in the mirror, for one, and understanding, okay, thanks. Having a look in the mirror and understanding what the threats look like, what's really important to your business, okay, and realistically, how much downtime can you go for, and then starting to work through a cybersecurity framework. One I particularly like is NIST, so National Institute for Standards and Technology, but they tend to work on 5 key pillars, which is identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. Okay, and kind of you can lay it out in all sorts of ways. I tend to lay it out in a circular motion, so that once you're through it once, you're right back to the start of it.
Nice and simple.
Yeah, and I would always start with any business on that recover standpoint, because as we've talked about a couple of times today, you can protect a million ways into your business. Not one slip up, that one mistake, and you're into that recovery section. So really work from the back up, saying, okay, well, what's really important to our business? If we were to lose access to all our systems, or we were we were locked out from everything, what systems would we need access to first and foremost, and in what order? And how can we protect those systems and make sure that we have a business continuity, disaster recovery solution and plan in place for those, so that if they were to go down, we can immediately get them back up and running. And I would say work up from there, and then work out how to secure those solutions, and then work out how to resecure and build on that and add layers. So you've got not just that one mistake and everyone's in, maybe they've got to hit through 2 or 3 different layers before you then into that sort of real disaster.
It makes sense, and it just kind of strips it back to basics. But as you say, I think people get scared, so just looking at it from that sort of angle just helps make it a bit more understandable. Demystifies, as you say.
That's it. Yeah, it's a big thing. I think you're looking at businesses of any shape and size, like, to try and work out what do I protect first is really difficult, because when you're looking at a full big picture, it's really scary. You've got to sort of not compartmentalize it, but break it down into the smaller chunks. Right? Yeah. What is super critical to us? For some businesses, it might just be like, hey, we need to have access to our email. If we don't have access to our core systems, that's fine. But if we can email people, we can do a good chunk of our job.
Yeah.
For others, it might be, hey, look, we need our database straight away. Or we need access to our CAD, our CAD drawings, all that sort of stuff immediately. We can't have a minute's loss of that. Understanding what it looks like for each individual organization is really important, and then building up from there.
And final question. So as the industry continues to digitize, what new challenges or opportunities do you see emerging around disaster recovery in the next 2 to 3 years?
So I think, again, just people keeping on top of their knowledge is really important. With digitized, and if we talk about people moving to like the cloud and digital transformation, I would like to think we've moved on a little bit from it, but there was, for a long time, this sort of mentality of if something's in the cloud, it's safe. That's infallible. It's in the cloud. I've got backups of it. So it's not the case. That bit of hardware that used to be in your office is now just in Microsoft's warehouse, or Amazon's warehouse, or another company's warehouse. It still exists as a bit of hardware. It's still got all the potential flaws and vulnerabilities as it had in your office. It's just someone else is managing that. But having, again, redundancy and backup in place for those cloud environments, we've seen a lot of businesses move to the likes of Azure, to host their data.
A lot of our customers do host that on there.
Yeah, and it's great. But if you put an Azure backup in place, a lot of the time that's just moving data from one place within Microsoft to another place within Microsoft. So what happens if Microsoft goes down? We all like to think Microsoft's too big to fail, but we've seen a lot of like Microsoft 365 and Azure outages recently. So actually, we want to make sure that if you're working in Azure, not only have you got that copy data maybe backed up in Azure, but you're also getting a copy out of Azure.
Yeah.
So that if something was to happen to Microsoft, you can still continue working, or you still have access to your data somewhere else. It's trying to get out of the mentality that just because something exists in the cloud, it's safe. It is generally safer, to be fair. It is generally safer if you're putting it in the right environment. Not every cloud environment. You know, I could put a server in my garage and say it's a cloud environment. Like, I wouldn't class that as particularly safe. You know, you're working with big companies, generally it's a little bit safer, but you still got to have that redundancy of saying, okay, well, and we're starting to see that again. We talked about compliance standards a little bit earlier. We are starting to see some of these standards, and particularly from like the likes of insurance companies coming down saying like, have you got redundancy in your data? So if you've got data in Microsoft, have you got that existing somewhere else? If you've got data in Amazon, have you got a copy of that data somewhere else that you can continue to access? It's up to date, you can continue to work off. There's tons of options out there, tons of solutions out there for it, but again, working out what's right for you and really looking to put that in place, but at a bare minimum, trying to make sure that you have a copy of your data outside of whatever cloud platform that you're working in, because it just takes, again, one mistake for that business to you know, be in a scenario where you don't have access to your data.
Excellent. Well, any last pieces of advice that you could offer to any businesses, and maybe where could they find you? I think you kind of do a lot of these talks, events. Is there anything coming up soon that we could let our guests know about?
I was at an event in Manchester last week where there's sort of 7 presentations in 2 weeks, so we're just off the back of a pretty busy one. I haven't got anything too big in the diary. We've got our own event, the company I work for, Kaseya. We have a big conference in Vegas happening at the end of April, start of May, called Kaseya Connect Global, which I'll be at. A couple other conferences in and around that as well. But I think for me, the first step for anyone is actually just taking a step, I think, in the right direction. Like, a lot of people taking the time to listen to this is a huge step in the right direction. You've taken time out of your business to understand what's important and what other steps can you be doing. Just go away and try action something. If you action something, you're making yourself 1% better. You know, that can make a huge difference over time. But too often I think we see people that, you know, unfortunately will take time out of the day to come to the conference today or other things, and they're really in it at that point in time. Then they go back to work tomorrow, and the standard pressure of work builds up, and everything they learned today kind of gets put into the back corner for a minute. Really try to take a little bit of time and think, right, well, what were some of the key things I took from saying, you know, what do I really need to start actioning or start moving forward in my business? You know,
I think that's one question we're trying to ask everyone before they leave today. What's one thing you will actually take back with you to your business and tell your colleagues about?
I would add to it as well. I'd put a pressure on it and be like, you know, when are you gonna schedule in the time to do it?
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, they'll be like, oh yeah, I'll do that. But then if they don't actually schedule in the time to do it, then it falls through the cracks again. And then, as I said, look, being here, engaging with the likes of Symetri, all that sort of stuff is big steps in the right direction. But really, again, having that sort of look in the mirror and understanding what is a potential threat for your business, you know, where are some of the weak points, where do you need to really make sure you have almost constant, instantaneous access, and then being able to build up from there is really important as well.
But yeah, Jack, thank you so much for joining us. It's been great listening to you, and we'll speak to you soon.
No worries. Thanks for having me, Nicole. I appreciate it.
Thank you.